StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल.
India's greatest strategic liability is Modi's ego, and our greatest strategic asset is Xi Jinping's stupidity. I keep saying that. He's the worst of China's presidents for a very long time. But the problem is somewhat different. I don't think China follows the rules, where they go to some parallel universe and free this thing. It requires America to go to a parallel universe and free them from their oppressors. So there's always this notion which is not in sync with reality. So today, Atmanirbhar Bharat, Vishwaguru Bharat. Tell me, what are we Vishwaguru at? Indian diplomacy, over-promises and under-delivers. Is America trustworthy? Is any country trustworthy? Is the USSR trustworthy?
But when it comes to Pakistan, we are very clear. See, again, Pakistan and China, two considerations, right? Right now, a Russia-China nexus is the most dangerous thing we're talking about from the Indian foreign policy.
Right. And he said the net result of partition wasn't that Pakistan got the Muslims and India got the Hindus. It was that Pakistan got the military, India got the bureaucracy, and they're going to hang around their necks like a hangman.
Hello and namaste, and welcome to StudyIQ educational platform. Today we have with us Abhijit Iyer Mitra, a well-known geopolitical expert and commentator. Welcome.
Thank you.
So he's currently a senior fellow at the IPCS, that is Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies. He is one of the most well-read analysts that I have actually come across. Although his opinions are slightly controversial, but they're always backed by facts and analysis. So आज इसी discussion में we are going to talk about or cover certain current geopolitical events and get his opinion on that. So the first question is something that UPSC loves to ask, right? And it's a topic that is taught across all the exam, like from GS to optional. That's a constant topic that is taught. The question is then, is the world order changing? Are we in a new Cold War?
It's a different kind of a war. I don't know if it's a Cold War, because it was the Cold War was between two poles. I think this is a more multipolar contestation with lots of micro contestations within it. So, the global north, the global south, the Middle Eastern monarchies versus the Middle Eastern republics, if you want to call Iran a republic at all, or Middle Eastern. So there's lots of micro contestations happening within this, which are not ideological, but I think we're heading for a systems collapse. And I think that has more to do with economics, because what used to happen was a lot of your financial viability used to be linked to your gold reserve. Now, the value of gold is completely notional, right? At the same time, if a comet hits the earth, I would rather be sitting on a gold reserve than opposed to, say, 100 rupee notes. Because a 100 rupee note is just as notional as that golden coin, right? But I think gold will have more value than a 100 rupee note if the world comes to an end. So this is strictly notional value. The problem now is a country's standing is no longer based on its gold reserve. It's based on its debt. Now, that's a very dangerous path to go down, because you're not creating value. You're just services and valuation game you're going on playing. And today we have a debt to equity ratio that is insane in America and the developed world. The borrowings rate for funding that lifestyle, it has to be backed by something tangible. You can't be selling people hot air in return for, I can't say, Dipanita, you give me your gold earrings and in return I'll give you a song. Okay. Unless I'm such a fantastic singer and I do it in your wedding where you...
I'm happy and I give it to you. Right.
Exactly. So, it is an unstable system right now, and what is getting worse is because of social media, polarization today is extreme. This was a phenomenon we used to see with the dark net in the early 2000s. Al-Qaeda was one of the first to get onto the dark net to recruit. And the thing there was, if a guy wanted to do international jihad or whatever in a village, he wasn't taken very seriously. They'd be like, "Ye to pagal hai, isko chhod do." Right? Problem is, you go on the dark net and you find other such psychos all over Iraq or Jordan or whatever. You create an online community and you weaponize it. And see, that becomes very dangerous. So what you're seeing is the kind of extreme political polarization that we're seeing these days is entirely a product of social media, where extremes tend to hijack conversations.
Okay.
And so when you add a lot of these things together, the debt-based financial credibility, the ESG-based credit ratings, or the DEI-based credit ratings, extreme polarization happening, all the micro contestations happening where they're forcibly clubbed into something. India is fascist. Why? Because Hindutva is bad, right? So the shoehorning, all of this leads me to believe we're heading for a systems collapse. It's going to be a very nasty systems collapse. Is it a cold war of sorts? Yes, but the world order is changing. It's not going to be nice when it actually changes.
Whenever we talk about the world order and we're talking about the new Cold War, the basic understanding is that the rule based, the hegemon that makes the rule, that is changing, right? So now the hegemon is under debt, right? The maximum amount of debt which China actually holds the reserve, right? And now the problem is that China is playing by the book but is also challenging the book, right? How do you see that panning out? Do you see a World War III happening or an Indo-Pacific conflict happening? Just remember that there's economic ties also behind them that is holding them back.
Yeah.
Do you think they're going to go beyond that?
I don't think you're going to see a World War III. I think nuclear deterrence holds firm irrespective. I think nuclear weapons kind of instill a certain dread in you not to cross certain lines. I could be wrong. You could have some crazy president replace Xi Jinping. Not that Xi Jinping is particularly smart or anything. India's greatest strategic liability is Modi's ego, and our greatest strategic asset is Xi Jinping's stupidity. I keep saying that. He's the worst of China's presidents for a very long time. But the problem is somewhat different. I don't think China follows the rules. They keep toying with rules and coming up with new ideas to suit them, which is, for example, the 9-dash line along the South China Sea. You tell me, when have we ever had this concept applied to maritime control? Tell me one country that's ever applied this to maritime control. So they don't play by the rules, right? You look at even their financial institutions. TK, IMF and World Bank were chaprasi institutions that used to listen to what their political masters would tell them. But at least there was a semblance of following rules and regulations and procedure. With China, you look at their loan giving. You tell me one cost benefit analysis of any Chinese OBOR project you've ever seen.
No.
Opportunity costing, nothing. So, it's sort of like, it's extremely arbitrary, almost in a way, like 1,000 years back in India, they used to come and say, Maharaj ki jai ho, Maharaj ka beta hua hai, and immediately you'll remove your golden necklace and give it to them. It's like that. Not one of those projects is economically viable. Everybody wants to talk about organic farming screwing over Sri Lanka. Why don't they want to talk about the debt accumulated on building that very glitzy beachfront and all the other infrastructure projects that never delivered? That was just as responsible. The organic farming combined, and mind you, it wasn't organic farming or the Chinese debt that screwed Sri Lanka over. It was COVID hitting and a large part of your economy getting screwed over, which kind of helped us go into UPI. So UPI became a success because of COVID. So, I don't think China follows the rules. The problem is America also stopped following the rules. So if you remember the Delian League in Athens and things like that during the Republican states period in Greece, initially it was Athens versus Sparta. Sparta was always a nasty dictatorship. Greece was always, Athens was always this democratic thing. And they'd set up the treasury in Delos. Once they gained hegemony, they moved it to Athens and they started using it to fund their own construction. It wasn't used for collective defense. It was used to fund the beautification of Athens. Right? So what America you saw doing was that once the Cold War ended, they became a triumphalist hegemon. They started violating rules. Sovereignty is sacrosanct in the UN Charter. You can't go around regime changing countries because you don't like them. See, Afghanistan, you can at least say, was justifiable defense after an attack has been carried out on you. Okay. But Libya, attempting to do it in Syria, going after Bosnia and Herzegovina, well, not after the Serbs in Bosnia, going after the Serbs in Kosovo, going after so many other states where they just wanted to regime change because there's been a coup.
But they did it in Right to Protect, right? R2P. That was a famous.
But R2P itself, according to me, it is a concoction which violates the fundamental basis of sovereignty as enshrined in the UN Charter. There is no part of the UN Charter which says that human rights trump sovereignty. The problem, of course, was that the Indian ambassador at that time used to be a communist who used to just pointless anti-everything, anti-Americanism. And he was replaced by Hardeep Singh Puri, who's now our Minister for Urban Development. And Hardeep did something very smart. He stopped this pointless obstructionism and he laid the principles of the 5 pillars of R2P. Is it 4 or 5 or 6? I forget now. Where he said they have to be sequential. You can't move on to the second pillar till you've exhausted the first. What was happening was they were bypassing 3 pillars and going directly into force, which was the 4th or I forget 5th pillar, whatever it was, the application of force, which you can't do. And he brought a sort of sequentiality to it. Of course, now R2P has been completely discredited. At one point when R2P had taken off, I think Libya was the final nail in the coffin of R2P because it was abused. Of course, the interventions in Kosovo and things like that were also a complete abuse of power because they never went through the UN. Remember, the Kosovo intervention never went through the UN. It was a NATO intervention completely outside the UN. Right? Libya, you had authorization to enforce a ceasefire. And Condi Rice's thing was, not Condi Rice, Susan Rice, I think, was it? You can't really have a ceasefire without regime change. But the resolution wasn't for regime change. And they misinterpreted it. And this is what happens when a hegemon gets too high up. And then, the Brazilians at that time were coming RWP, while protecting.
Something.
Yeah.
There was some playing around with R2P wala concept also.
And there was a lot of money for that kind of nonsense.
It was one time. It was the way that hegemon was.
Exactly. And now it's all gone.
Gone.
It's finished, right? Technically, you could justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine the same way. To protect the Russian minority after those 52 people were burnt alive in Odessa.
Set of argument that you gave that China doesn't have economically viable projects. Then one of the questions that usually comes when I teach IR is that string of pearls ko leke. Now, I keep telling that it's a concept that is dated. Aaj ke din wo string of pearls nahi hai. It's an overuse. But tabhi bhi wo ek aa hi jata hai ki string of pearls ka kya? Because especially with the Djibouti military base coming in and the satellite photos showing what a big base and everything. What about that? Do you think it's a...
So, for me, I have never viewed the string of pearls as a negative thing. Especially the way it used to be explained, where the Chinese fleet could gather in limited quantities and then be used for power projection later on. I was like, yes, because this is China dividing up its fleet into small manageable packages which a dedicated airstrike or missile strike could get rid of. So for me, it was militarily very stupid on the part of the Chinese. It was very good for India.
How?
Very simple. Because, there is such a thing called the critical volume of force.
Correct.
With 100 people, you won't be able to smash that particular armored column. But say with 1,000, you will.
Correct.
China was dividing up its forces into these small little packets which were eminently dealable. Okay. The second thing was Chinese weapons quality has always been vastly inferior to Western weapons quality. As long as you were using Western weapons, you always had a very significant localized advantage over them. Right? So for me, that was a very good thing. I was like, aur karne do. Let them keep spending on this because it's very stupid. And what would happen was they would never be able to match the American Navy. One American aircraft carrier would be enough for about 2-3 Chinese aircraft carriers.
But the narrative is that string of pearls was to constrain India. It was
to constrain India, which is why we started.
And our maritime force at that point of time was not equivalent to handle even the dealable.
Right. And that is where my criticism of the naval doctrine used to keep coming in. Because for me, it should have been a strategy of sea denial, not sea control. Now, see, the Soviet Union, which was 1/3 the size of America, trying to match up to America is a fool's errand, right? China, which is India, which is what, 1/4 or less than 1/4 China's economy, trying to match up aircraft carrier to aircraft carrier with China was extremely financially very stupid, militarily also very stupid. You can't do it. So my thing always was, don't go in for sea control, don't go in for equivalence, go in for sea denial, which and make it a completely Western interoperable fleet which can seamlessly interoperate with the US Navy when it decides to come in. Right? The US Navy doesn't even have to enter the war for you. You have this thing with the US Navy. You remember how the 7th Fleet was sent against us in 1971,
Yeah.
right?
So, there's a movie also on that.
There's a
Yes,
movie on
yes.
that. So it was sent against us in 1971. The US Navy doesn't have to get involved in the war. You send 3-4 aircraft carriers into the Indian Ocean. We'll use it as an island where our submarines will hide. The Americans will know our submarines are hiding below them. We'll keep going out of their protection zone and going and firing off submarine to ship missiles at the Chinese fleet.
That is a.
We want to be strategically autonomous. And this is the problem with using jargon. People forget what strategic autonomy was. What was strategic autonomy? It was the right to bomb Pakistan without having sanctions or anything from America placed on you.
Right.
It was that simple. But then it took on a whole ideological framework of its own and whatever. The French have a very similar doctrine called autosuffisance. Autosufficient. I mean, the way it translates into English is self-reliance. And in certain key areas, they believe in having an industrial complex that is completely free from American or any other kind of interference. So, for example, the nuclear submarines, they would much rather go in for old CRT displays. You remember those big TVs with like 5 feet depth and things like that?
Macron is the only Western president who has been open about that West is falling. There's a rise of new power.
Yeah.
Nobody else has actually been so vocal about it. At least the allies may.
Yeah.
France has been very vocal about it.
And they were pushing decoupling from China, which took off after during COVID. But then after COVID and Biden's election, nobody's talking about decoupling. America's kind of decoupling. They're putting these slow, strangulating sanctions on China on semiconductors and things like that. But it's not at the same pace. It's not at a pace where it'll actually achieve critical mass very soon.
So let's come to India from there. In this whole chaotic world order, where do you see India, first of all? And second, we have been talking about being a Vishwaguru. Do you think our aspirations meets our reality?
I don't think our aspirations have ever met our reality. No? We used to claim to be the champion of the third world and non-aligned movement and things like that. I think now because we have the internet, in those days, you weren't allowed to bring in all those books and things like that. If you go and look at Nasser's view of India or Sukarno's view of India, they had a very poor view of India. They did not. I think people forget Sukarno during the 1965 war sent Indonesian submarines to help out the Pakistanis.
True. Was very critical about India.
Yeah. And that's because he had a policy of confrontasi and he wanted the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. He believed that they belonged to Indonesia. Our self-view of ourselves is very different from what others actually view us as. It's like America's view of itself. America's like, oh my God, everybody loves us, like freedom and democracy. And, they're all waving the American flag and wearing jeans. Nobody likes Americans, but that's their view of themselves. You look at American movies, it's always Americans going and bringing freedom and democracy to, even in alien worlds. Have you watched that movie Stargate? Where they go to some parallel universe and free this thing. It requires America to go to a parallel universe and free them from their oppressors. So there's always this notion which is not in sync with reality. So today, Atmanirbhar Bharat, Vishwaguru Bharat. Tell me, what are we Vishwaguru at?
For a change, suddenly countries are eager to talk to us.
But countries were always eager to talk to us for the
way
last...
right now, right? There's a sense of respect. There's suddenly a narrative that, India is a partner.
But I saw that changing in the 1990s. Once the software revolution and the pharmaceutical revolution took off under Narasimha Rao, I saw that narrative change. In the 80s and early 90s, nobody wanted to engage with us because we were just another third world country. There were so many British and American strategists who were saying India is going to break up, right? I saw that change in the 1990s. Right. If you go back and read Dennis Cook's book on Cucks or Cooks, I don't know what it is, books on India-America relationship and things like that, the Americans were always very eager to engage with India. It was always India that went on pushing them back because they'd be like, you know, you owe us this, this, this. We're starving. Our people are starving. So please send us all this grain aid. And then Krishna Menon would go say nasty things about them at the UN. So we alienated a lot of people. But there was always an engagement with India, which is, I won't say it's more. In fact, I would say that at least for the last, it's not a time period, it's more, it happens in intervals. There is something called India fatigue that sets into Washington, D.C., where, you know, the American Congress, they just give up and say, you know, this is pointless. I mean, this, it was at a high in 2008 when the nuclear deal happened. By 2012, India fatigue had already set in DC. Then with Modi coming in, it again became a high, and then in another 3-4 years, there was already India fatigue setting. And that has a lot to do with the fact that Indian diplomacy overpromises and underdelivers.
So again, I'm going to come here with another statement by Shiv Shankar Menon. The book Choices, he writes that Indian foreign policy is cautious in making, it is bold in making but cautious in implementation. So do you agree with that?
He's being very polite to himself. India is an enforcement deficit state across the board. We come up with fantastic policies, we're never very good at implementing. You know, non-alignment was a fantastic policy. If you look at it, the basis of it was very sound. What was the basis of it? That no continental power should ever
have an
influence on Asia, which meant it was basically a continuation of British divide and rule policy. China and Russia should never come together or attempt to break them, which is why Nehru would go, you know, cozy up to Khrushchev. And then, you know, oh, you're the global leaders, this and that. But then he'd go to Mao Zedong and say, or Zhou Enlai and say, oh, bhai, you're the Asian leaders. Screw the Russians. You're the real leaders. We'll do the Bandung conference for you and things like that. Asian leadership. It was actually very smart policy. It was divide and rule. The problem was it lost everything in implementation because you had people who were indisciplined, who were never disciplined, like Krishna Menon, going and shooting their mouths off at the UN and just saying, why do you need to be unpleasant? When you want something from somebody. If you don't want something from somebody, you can be totally unpleasant. So if, for example, you're driving a car and this fellow comes in front of you and you're forced to stop, you can lower your window and give him maa baap ki gali or whatever, right? But if the guy crossing is your boss, sir, kya kar rahe hain, sir, etc., right? What was the need? When you wanted weapons, arms, this, that, money, those days we were a very poor country. We were living ship to mouth. We were always on the verge of famine. Grain. Why do you go abuse them? Nehru told Krishna Menon to vote against the Soviet invasion of Hungary. He directly defied that order and voted for the Soviet invasion of Hungary. Nehru took no action against him because chum, buddy, whatever. India is a severe enforcement deficit state because we have, say, simple things. Your diplomats don't have the bandwidth. We're too small.
Right.
We don't have the bandwidth to be on top of every issue. We don't have the mid-career training, the specializations and things like that required, or the career planning that once you've specialized in something, your career is planned all the way through the end in that particular vertical. We don't do any of that.
So that was part of Shashi Tharoor committee's recommendation.
Yeah, police also. Police has we have one of the lowest police to population ratios anywhere in the world. How do you expect law and order if you have such a low police to population ratio? Every single in your judiciary, the quality of your district court level judiciary is so low that you have turned the high courts and the Supreme Court into not just appeal but full re-litigation. When it goes to the High Court, it is not an appeal. We call it an appeal. An appeal is only meant to look at the facts that were presented in the lower court and then rule on that. No, it becomes full-on re-litigation in the High Court and then full-on re-litigation in the Supreme Court. Why? Because the caliber of your judges and lawyers at the lower level is shocking. Right? We don't have one Supreme Court. We have 14 different Supreme Courts, each of which can have a completely diametrically opposite view to the other on any given issue on any given day. The law is the law because it is consistent in its application. When you have diametrically different views like this is not the law.
So going back to US, one of the reasons why we could not actually go and quote US as such, because US was openly supporting Pakistan, and Pakistan has been a very dominant force in our policy making. So how do you trust US with that? Grey list of in FATF, again nikal diya, abhi fir se SISMA sign kar rahe hain. You can't trust US like that, right? And
so, a lot of things, if you go back to how is Finland able to manage its relations with the USSR and the USA so well?
Finland has very little population. They are not.
Yeah, you stay out of the limelight, even though it was strategically very, very important. They had access to all the Western technology they wanted. They also had all the access to the Russian technology they wanted. See, if you want to play this game of balancing, you should be low profile. The problem that we had was we wanted to be high profile and leader of the non-aligned world. This delusion of, global leadership, very dangerous. Bhikari leader nahi ban sakta hai. When you're literally living from ship to mouth, it's literally like me, well, I'm not a bhikari right now, but compared to Mukesh Ambani, I am a bhikari. So I go, when Mukesh Ambani's Rolls Royce is coming out of his Antilla, I go knock on the, not that security let me, but assume, brief suspension of disbelief. I knock on his window and he say, hey Mukesh bhai, de dena, thoda do kaudi de dena. And then I'm like, hey Mukesh bhai, tere ko company nahi chalana aata hai, main bataunga tere ko. This is what you were doing. How does this work? It doesn't work in any permutation or combination of any of this. And this is what went on happening. Is America trustworthy? Is any country trustworthy? Is the USSR trustworthy?
But when it comes to Pakistan, we are very clear. See, again, Pakistan and China, two considerations, right? Right now, a Russia-China nexus is the most dangerous thing we're talking about from the Indian foreign policy.
Right.
But for Pakistan, we have been very categorical that any country that helps Pakistan is not one that we can trust.
Right. So why was America helping Pakistan? Because our divide and rule policy was never explained to the Americans clearly. You show me one diplomatic cable or reported conversation between Nehru. All the Nehru anecdotes and analogies and reports are of him going on getting irritated with American presidents or trying to ogle Jacqueline Kennedy. He wasn't interested in husband Kennedy. He was only interested in wife Kennedy. What do? If you have, I totally understand this. A guy who's been brought up as a British lord or thinking he's a British lord will have contempt for somebody who talks about money so openly like an American does. In Britain, you just don't talk about how much money you have. In America, it's the first thing you do. You flash it. You can't impose your own personal likes and dislikes like that, especially when you're a Bhikari state. And that was done. That is why, you read Dennis Cook's books on the Pakistan-America relationship and the India-America relationship. It's a very clear line about how they went on trying to engage with India. They found India difficult, diffident. What is the need to be difficult and diffident? There's no need to, you ask me for my, Abhijit, can I have your iPhone? I say, no, Deepanita, I'm sorry. I really need my phone and I don't have money to buy another phone right now. So, you can't have it. The other way is I get completely berserk and, hey, kya mera phone mang? Why? What is the need to grandstand about this? And yet that was what was being done. So we have always been, Shiv Shankar Menon is putting it very politely, but we've always been a huge deficit state in terms of enforcing anything or delivering.
So let's come to the neighborhood now. Pakistan, Gilgit-Baltistan. There's a lot of protest going on, and there's a statement that they're eagerly looking forward to joining India. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. It's people tend to forget that, there are nuclear weapons at play out here. And if you remember, who was the Pakistani general who laid the 4 thresholds of Pakistan's nuclear usage? There was the spatial threshold, the economic threshold, the military threshold, and one more threshold, that if the Indian army captures so much space, Pakistan will resort to a first use of nukes. If India destroys so much of their economy, they will resort to nukes, etc., etc. How do we exactly think that these guys are going to come join us?
So you think Balochistan issue will be resolved through force the way it is being done right now?
Balochistan and Gilgit-Baltistan will go the way Balochistan went, which is it will be crushed brutally by the Pakistani military, and that's that.
So do you think that India has a deep state the way Pakistan has? Because I'm talking on the military, so
Yes and no. I don't think India has a deep state as much as it has inertia. There is no need to change per se. Now, you can call it a deep state, which is, I would say, the bureaucracy. But it's more to do with bureaucratic inertia rather than outright malignancy like in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there is sheer malignancy from the military that want to interfere and control things. The bureaucracy doesn't want to control things out here. They just want to prevent the worst from happening. And trust me, as long as Indira Gandhi and Nehru were around, there was a lot to prevent. So I don't blame them for it either. But I don't know if you've read that paper by Sir Ivor Jennings. It's called Constitutional Problems in Pakistan. He wrote it in 52 or 1950. And he said the net result of partition wasn't that Pakistan got the Muslims and India got the Hindus. It was that Pakistan got the military, India got the bureaucracy, and they're going to hang around their necks like a hangman's noose.
going from Pakistan, let's talk about China then. China border talks, they're going nowhere. With the new map coming up, it is now a psychological warfare, which has been going on for some time, and we have been ignoring it. Do you think it's time to challenge one China policy?
I wanted to challenge one China policy for a very, very long time. There are ways of challenging the one China policy without challenging it. Say what if Modi goes off for a holiday, a personal holiday to Taiwan? Or Amit Shah goes off for a cricket match to Taiwan. We ask the Taiwanese to host a cricket match, and we go there to play it against the Taiwanese cricket team. There are many, many ways of challenging it. You don't have to. Is there anything in the one China policy that says you can't supply arms to Taiwan?
No.
No. So why aren't you?
Taiwan ready to buy it from us? That's the question.
They've wanted to buy things, even though their military R&D is notorious, just like our DRDO, for promising and not delivering.
But they keep buying it from the US.
They do. They buy a lot of things from the US, but they were looking to buy a lot of things from us as well, just to build up relations. Not because they needed it, but to build up relations. What prevents you from wink, wink, nudge, nudge, supplying them with nuclear weapons? That's what China did to us by supplying it to Pakistan. Why aren't you doing it to China?
Because we are not a P5 country, that's why.
That doesn't matter. Who's going to find out? If your intelligence is good enough, supply them. There is no better guarantee of Taiwan's security than nuclear weapons.
So much of presence in the South China Sea. You think we can actually trade or supply nuclear weapons, at least?
Of course. Sundarji always wanted to supply Taiwan with nuclear weapons.
In the current geopolitical situation?
In the current geopolitical situation, I think this is a very malignant thing that the Foreign Service keeps doing. They actually believe that India is going to become a P5 and that China is going to vote for it. I will tell you, in my lifetime, I'll give you a guarantee, China is not voting for India's P5 membership.
So if India is not there...
So India keeps thinking, China vote karega, we shouldn't anger China, we shouldn't anger China, we shouldn't anger China. China doesn't respect weakness. Do you remember when the USSR voted, when everybody voted to switch recognition, the Security Council seat was Taiwan's seat. Do you remember that?
Yes.
It was in 75 or 76 that they switched it from Taiwan to the PRC. This was after the PRC and the USSR had fought their little war. Why did the USSR vote for China? Because they respect strength. Nobody respects a weakling. You have a huge segment, this whole so-called China cabal within the IFS, that believes that the way to getting greater Chinese empathy and sympathy is through obsequiousness. And I would say that has not worked. That has not worked. Don't challenge them openly, but challenge them in a lot of ways where they feel there are going to be irreversible consequences to them.
To not challenge them openly. Do you think India is not military ready to go for a war with China? Do you think that is a possibility?
We are for about a month, but after that month, what happens? Western weapons will give you a certain superiority, but industrial supply chains bhi kuch hota hai na? The industrial supply chains of China are much bigger, much deeper, much wider. They produce a lot more of their weapons. Their entire weapons industry is domestic, right? They have that benefit. We do not. Our entire air force is a foreign air force. Most of our navy, all our weapon systems in the navy are foreign weapons, right? So what do?
So coming to Vivek Ramaswamy, contender of presidency in the US right now. So he has said that once he comes to power, he will take steps to block the Malacca Strait, right? So one of his ideas, right? So he says that strategic ambiguity से strategic clarity तक जाना है, वहाँ पे ताइवान को independence का support देना है, plus Strait of Malacca को block करना है, right? Strait of Malacca, and he's saying all of this to support India's position in the Indian Ocean, right? So do you think India will be willing for this? Because it's going to be an open war then.
I don't think it's a question of willing, because I think our naval strategy for a long time is focused on choking off the Malacca Straits. The question is, do we have the capability to do it? And this again keeps coming back to the sea denial with seamless integration with the US Navy to do it, as opposed to our current force posture. Do you know the latest Chinese destroyer has more vertical launch tubes than your entire Eastern Fleet? Wow. One Chinese destroyer has more vertical launch tubes than your entire Eastern Fleet.
Right.
And what are we doing? Instead of, standardizing it like the Americans have on the Aegis class destroyer, we keep buying 3, 6, idhar, udhar, without a standardizing. We don't even standardize.
We don't standardize, right.
One will have American engines, one will have Ukrainian engines, one will have Russian engines. Why? Economies of scale naam ki bhi kuch cheez hoti hai na? That you only get engine technology if you create economies of scale, if you buy in sufficient bulk to facilitate the transfer of technology. We don't even do that. It was announced that we were going to get American jet engine technology, and the Americans were very clear they're not giving us the crystal blade technology. Then 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister goes to France, and then we're also getting French engine technology. Which one are you getting?
So how do you think Pakistan balances economic help from China, military help from US? How is it balanced?
I don't think Pakistan balances very well.
Then how are they getting that advantage?
They balanced well up to the 1960s, where Ayub Khan was industrializing the country. But that got aborted with Ayub Khan. Yahya Khan wasn't able to take it forward, and then Zulfikar Ali Bhutto completely destroyed it, because he was all the socialism. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was to Pakistan what Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro were to Venezuela, taking it from one of the richest countries in the southern hemisphere into utter penury, or what Perón was to Argentina. Socialism does not work. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto did that. He destroyed Pakistan. There was no industrialization anymore. Ab dekho kahan pe hain? They're going from bankruptcy to bankruptcy. The loans they're taking are just enough to service their debt. There's not even enough money for spending.
In this slide, why is US supplying so much weapons?
They're not.
They are.
No. When was the last?
SISMOA ke baad to aur, matlab they're talking
SISMOA was signed with us, not with them.
We have Comcasa, right? Let's come to Europe. So again, so coming to Europe, we'll talk about Douglas Murray's book, right? Death of Europe, 3 reasons: immigration, identity, and Islam. You think that is happening? Europe is no longer the power it was?
For a variety of reasons. I don't agree with Douglas Murray completely. I don't think Islam is the reason for it. I think this replacement theory is just a conspiracy theory. It's not going to happen per se. Europe has problems of its own, which are an over-bureaucratization. Over-bureaucratization where, all governments are fundamentally kleptocracies. You're taking money from the people in order to provide certain services, and the kleptocracy part is what is required to maintain that particular bureaucracy. Europe has too much bureaucracy. It is too dysfunctional. They went in for very ideological positions on things like Ukraine and refugees, which they should not have. You are going through an unprecedented economic crisis. You remember that entire thing where Yanis Varoufakis was sacked as the Greek finance minister and all of that. And at the same time, you want refugees to come in. Yeah, you have huge financial burdens. How are you going to take on the burden of refugees coming in? And this wasn't just any refugees. This was 2, 3, 4, 5 million refugees. How are you going to deal with so many accumulated blows at the same time? Brexit happening. One of these is a systemic shock. 2, 3 of these happening all at the same time is a systemic catastrophe. And I don't think Europe has learnt its lessons. I still don't think they've learnt their lessons because they're going on trying to impose social policy on countries like Poland and Hungary, which are conservative. And this is where the end of Europe is going to start, where there is a conservative East and there is a liberal West, and the liberal West wants to impose its views on Poland, Hungary, and the conservative East. It's going to be very, very problematic. I only see the internal divisions in Europe get worse and worse and worse. The economy is going to keep getting worse and worse and worse because where is the focus on manufacturing? There is none. There is none. To be fair, they've not gone as much, say, into services as Americans have. Can you name one great European software product? Why is that, by the way? Why has Apple not come out? Name one European phone.
Not really there.
There's nothing. There used to be Ericsson and Nokia. Ab dono gaye. There is a death of manufacturing happening in Europe. Prices are going up because you're subsidizing all kinds of inefficiency and kleptocracy and things like that. And you've chosen ideology over reality.
So anyway, we move to the next set of questions. Now, this one I'm going to keep it very short, and I just want your opinion on this, right? Keep it short for that. One of the topic is race for Arctic. Do you think what is going to be the impact of that? It is like one of the hot topics again for UPSC, and with India's Arctic policy coming in, and Nordic countries are now suddenly becoming so important. Now, summits are happening. How do you see that panning out?
Look, I think we're confusing process with achievement. I think a lot of it is process. Look, let's be clear about this. The Arctic will be controlled by the Arctic periphery countries. Okay, so it'll be Russia, it'll be Norway, it'll be Canada, and be America. And that's really it. If India thinks it has a role to play out here, I'm sorry. Reality check or truth bomb, whatever you want to call it. India may have great ambitions. We may piggyback onto the Russian ambitions out there, but nothing beyond that.
Second, can we trust Russia with the close Russia-China ties?
Increasingly less so. The closer Russia keeps going into Chinese orbit, the less we will have reason to trust them. Because remember, once upon a time, China was the junior partner, Russia was the senior partner. Today, Russia is the junior partner, and really junior partner, whereas China is the senior partner. So, we can never match the volumes of Russian energy and commodities that China buys. Ultimately, these things matter.
Turkey-Pakistan friendship, how does that pan out?
It's fantastic on paper, nothing more.
Nothing more.
They've always had this. So, the Turks have a very strange view of the Indian independence movement. They actually think the Khilafat movement was started by the Pakistan movement, not by Gandhi, but by the Pakistan movement. And this is the hogwash that the Pakistanis have fed the Turks very reliably. So the Pakistan movement started off the Khilafat movement, and the Khilafat movement was a movement to save Turkey. It was not. It was a movement to save the Caliph. It wasn't a movement to save Turkey. But this is what they've been told. They actually believe this. You go to a Turkish university. You go to a Turkish think tank. This is the version that will be given to you.
Not really come across that. So
yeah. They actually don't know that Gandhi started off the Khilafat movement. So, and this tells you a lot about our diplomats and our diplomacy with regards to Turkey. But it also has other things to do with, Sir Olaf Caro's book, The Wells of Power, where he said, there are these frontline states that are going to defend us against the USSR. And those frontline states were going to be Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey. Because they would prevent the southern push of the USSR. Pakistan, of course, didn't have a border with the USSR, so I don't know why Olaf Caro included it in there. Apparently, a lot of it had to do with Indian diffidence, this entire thing, which is why he said, screw India, let's put Pakistan here instead. Otherwise, it would have been India. And since then, they saw themselves as this kind of kindred anti-communist alliance kind of. But you look at it, how it translates into the reality on ground. How much do you actually see? They're buying 2-3 frigates from the Turks. The Turks, when Pressler sanctions were in place, would provide them with spare parts for the F-16s. But that's about it. It's nothing very significant.
Do you think climate change is a farce, like Trump used to keep calling it?
No. I think climate change is very, very real. We should be taking it very, very seriously. But I think what is a farce is the people that have monetized and weaponized climate change and engage in fear-mongering. You remember Greta Thunberg's first video, which by this time we should have been wiped out by now. No? She predicted the end of the world in what, 2020?
Yeah, the first one that she said, that was going to be a matter of few.
Yeah, but it hasn't happened, right? So it's there is a lot of fear-mongering that happens out there. That said, remember, human history is a litany of climate change. Why were the Turkic tribes migrating west? Why were the Huns migrating west? Why were the Mongols migrating west? It's because of climate change events. Why did the bubonic plague break its thermal temperature barrier and spread to Europe from its Mongol eastern Siberian stronghold? It's because of climate change, right? Climate change has always had a massive, massive impact on human history. The problem is we've never really recognized why did the Maya collapse? Climate change again. How so many civilizations have collapsed because of old dynasty Egypt collapsed because of climate change, because of the droughts and famine that struck it. The problem has long been that we look at climate change as something esoteric. We've now begun to understand, because of our new scholarship, how it affects the polity and society and the economy of countries, and how it has direct impacts on all of those things. Which is why I think it was, I am not a climate change denier. I actually believe in it. I have always believed in it, much before it became a very popular word, because when you see certain things happening, it takes you back to climate change. So no, I don't think, but there is a huge fraud industry that is based on climate change that we need to crush. If people are going to need to take it seriously, you can't allow this lack of trust to continue. Remember, there was vaccine hesitancy because of a lot of the corrupt politics of the WHO and Dr. Death. He's actually Dr. Tedros something, whatever, the head of the WHO. Unfortunately, he's coming for the G20. Curses on him and his house. WHO is one of the most corrupt bodies you'll ever find. It is all based on you scratch my back, I scratch yours. The way the WHO screwed up so many elements of the vaccine and predicting how COVID had already become airborne because of their definitional problems, they should have not been allowed to get away with it, and they have. And this is the problem with so much climate change fraud, is that way too many people. Listen, if the face of climate change has to be somebody like Greta Thunberg, who's going to take you seriously? I take climate change very seriously. I do not take Greta Thunberg seriously.
Right.
And if you think you're going to make climate change cool on the basis of how dare you, you have a serious messaging problem.
I think the problem is that a lot of Karens have come up, Karen, who are like, they are like really
It's become
angry.
a cult.
Yeah,
It's become
exactly.
a cult.
It's become about it.
And I've seen this in Europe. There is pointless fear mongering on this. Right. It's, you're going to die tomorrow. You're going to die tomorrow. You're going to die tomorrow.
Sustainable transition is also important. Otherwise, you're good. Yeah.
It is. And mind you, India has more installed green power than, say, Germany does. Did you know that? Almost 38% of our grid is apparently green. Solar power, wind power, water power. France is 72% nuclear, which is technically green energy because there are no emissions and things coming from it. There have always been easy, sustainable ways of doing things which are getting carried away by a whole load of crap. Like wind power, for example, is one of the most useless kinds of power you could. It kills birds. It kills a lot of animals. It's a moving part. It has to keep getting replaced. It's even simple things. Sustainability in architecture. They want you to build green energy reduction, this, that, whatever, whatever, whatever. Tell me, what is more sustainable? A building you're putting in with all these technologies that's only going to last for 20 to 30 years, or something that the Romans built that lasts for 2000 years? दोनों में cement use करना है. The Romans invented cement. Their buildings have lasted for 2000 years. So what was built, and then it didn't have to keep getting rebuilt every 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So, you know, even there is so much fraud and quackery even with our approaches to sustainability. EVs, the worst kind of, what do you think a battery is? It's highly corrosive equipment. It's highly corrosive liquids inside that battery. You know, you take a battery, the tip end, and you put it on your tongue. You know those batteries जो आते थे एक ज़माने में जहाँ both positive और negative एक side में होता था. You put it on your tongue, it'll burn your tongue.
I have again.
We used to do it just for fun. We used to say, hey, try car, and so, you know, there's this whole EVs are not the future. I would say hydrogen is more the future. Ethanol is also not the future. Nitin Gadkari has been pioneering two technologies. One is hydrogen, which I support 100%, especially because of the technological breakthroughs that have happened recently, which is, you know, producing hydrogen was a very energy intensive process. It is no longer that. So that's a very good thing. And you can refill the car instantly. So wo range anxiety jo hai is no longer there. The second thing he's pioneered this week has been ethanol, which I've always been a huge opponent of, because the best ethanol comes from sugarcane, which is one of the most destructive water table destroying crops that you can ever have. And it unnecessarily gets a binary between food production and fuel production. Right? I think hydrogen is the way to go. I would have been totally fine with EVs had it not been for the fact that that fluid is so intensely corrosive. What are you going to do with it after those 8 years? See, the problem with EVs in India is we don't have an 8-year-old EV jiska disposal hona hai. And then what happens when all these EV ka batteries start piling up? Where is the land for you to dispose all of it? And you know, the highly corrosive stuff, you put it into the ground, it's going to have very serious consequences on the water table and things like that.
There are countries which have banned EVs also because of that, right? There are a lot of countries which are not looking forward to go for it.
The first Tesla in Singapore was fined $100,000 because apparently it consumed more energy than a regular car. I'm not for banning EVs right now. I think it's a short-term solution to the problem. I think the problem with India is we're always looking at short-term solutions. We're not looking at long-term solutions. This is like, you know, how, because we were living ship to mouth in the 50s and 60s or having famines in the 40s, we went in for these dwarf variety crops and destroyed our genetic diversity. There are still, and all our genetic diversity was sent off to the Crop Research Institute in the Philippines, and they were destroyed out there. I don't know why they were destroyed, but they were destroyed. Thankfully, some people preserved crops, and so there's a whole bunch of genetic diversity coming back into the system, where you now realize that it is genetic diversity that's required to prevent disease and so on and so forth. That is what helps you. That is what protects you against certain kinds of pestilence or plague or whatever. To crops, not to human beings, of course. It's the same thing with EVs. It solves a short-term problem, which is your fuel import bill, but long-term, it's just completely unsustainable.
Right.
And mind you, it is because of the Green Revolution that the green belt in Punjab is now the cancer belt. Because it is all those phosphate and nitrous fertilizers that we used out there that seeped into the soil and are now giving those people cancer.
Going to the last section of this discussion, I'll just put two previous year questions. These are from General Studies paper 2. So you have to answer them in 250 words, but right, feel free. The first question is, the long sustained image of India as a leader of the oppressed and marginalized nations has disappeared on account of its newfound role in the emerging global order. So newfound role in the...
First, India never had that image. I think it's a lot of government narrative that pushed this narrative that the rest of the world views us as a champion of the oppressed and the poor. I think you can go, I have actually been to several of those countries, North Korea, for example, Cuba, Haiti, Sudan, which really don't even know who India is, leave alone viewing you as the champion of the poor. And of course, in those days, we didn't have global connections. People couldn't travel that easily. You remember, once upon a time, a 707 ticket was the equivalent to a modern first class ticket. So people couldn't travel that easily. So people didn't know better. So whatever the government propaganda machinery told you, you believed it. And that is no longer the case because we don't want to say we're bhikaris anymore. We're now Atmanirbhar Bharat, Vishwaguru Bharat. So it no longer suits our image, our self-delusion.
Right, but usually we have to give a...
See, I'm not going to pass the UPSC exam.
Right.
Both my parents were, my dad was actually the deputy director of the academy in Mussoorie. And they both retired as, my mom retired as secretary and my dad retired as additional secretary. She was state and he was in the center. And the one thing, my dad was a communist, my mom was a capitalist. The only thing they could agree on is Abhijit isn't going to pass the UPSC exam and he should never try to join the UPSC.
Right.
So please don't take my answer as the model. It's the truth
should
bomb.
not.
Yeah, it's the truth bomb that your examiner does not want to hear. Please
Right.
flatter their ego.
Balanced answer is the way out. Let's have a second question, right? What introduces friction into the ties between India and US is that Washington is still unable to find for India a position in its global strategy which would satisfy India's national self-esteem and ambitions. Explain, elucidate. So basically trying to find a place.
So we've discussed how India's self-view has been evolving. A champion of the poor to now a high-tech emerging country that is a global superpower. The problem has always been the reality versus our self-opinion of ourselves. The Americans view you through a certain lens. You view yourself through a certain different lens. And therein lies the problem. I would say the American view of India is not realistic, but it's not far off the mark either. I think the Indian view of India is quite unrealistic, but it's not far off the mark in terms of aspirationality. And therein lies the problem. This is what happens when reality meets aspiration.
Do you think the Indian diaspora would have a role in
No, I
bridging this
actually
gap?
don't, because through the Cold War, America did not like us. They sent their fleets against us. They supplied Pakistan with a whole load of equipment. Where was the diaspora then? I mean, we were a democracy even then. But those were the lowest points. I mean, America today tells you that democracy is ending in India. It's a democratic backsliding. Jab hum full democracy the, according to them, we're actually far freer now than we were then. People just don't remember any of that. You had no time for us. You were actively hostile to us. So, no, I don't.
Vivek Ramaswamy would change it? I know you are supporting him, so...
No, I don't think Vivek... Vivek is in for a very severe reality check when he comes to power, if he comes to power. Because what he doesn't realize is that India overpromises and underdelivers. And this has actually been very, very problematic. You know, Putin's office, at one point, Putin actually started believing that the Indians were lying to him. Because the chronic overpromising that happened to Putin was an old India hand in the Kremlin would have been able to tell him that the Indians tend to overpromise and underdeliver. Problem is, after the fall of the USSR, all those old India hands were no longer employed. India wasn't a high priority. Remember, there was a guy called Evgeny Kosygin, who was the foreign minister, who detested India under Boris Yeltsin. And he got rid of all the old India hands. And the other India hands were really jokers, like the ambassador who died recently. What was his name? Not Trubnikov, the other guy. There's a road named after him now, one of those roads off Shantipat are named after him. He was a bit of a joker. What Trubnikov and him did was mostly during the collapse of the USSR, they used to import cars and sell it off in the black market because, you know, diplomats don't pay import duty on cars. They used to sell it off on the black market, and the Indians turned a blind eye to it because Rus hai, hamara dost hai. They need money to sustain the embassy. At that time, they didn't even have money to sustain the embassy. It was that bad.
So let's come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you so much for coming. It was really an interesting discussion today, Abhijit. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
With this, we come to an end. Thank you so much for joining us today.
StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।